Welcome to the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast with psychologist Dr. Doreen Downing. Listen in as Doreen interviews people who felt they didn't have a voice or who suffered extreme speaking anxiety. You'll hear stories about how they struggled to speak up, what they did to find their authentic voice, and the confidence they now feel to speak up and make an impact. If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. And now, here is Doreen.
Hi, this is Dr. Doreen Downing. I host the Find Your Voice, Change Your Life podcast. And here is where exactly my guest, you listeners, get to follow somebody's story, somebody's journey, a time when they felt like they didn't have a voice, or a time when they felt like they weren't heard, or when they were developing perhaps a new sense of themselves, which required a different kind of voice. And today, I think this latter one may be what we're what we're in for, in for, however you want to put it. And my guest is Beth Erlander. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Doreen.
Yes. So you sent me a bio. I want to read that so people get an instant information about who you are and what you do. And then we'll open up the conversation and see where we get to go, explore, and uncover. Beth Erlander, grief expert. I'm going to start that over. Beth Erlander is a grief expert and seasoned therapist with over 26 years of experience. She works with grief and loss issues from any kind of sudden life transition. Yet the main focus of her work is serving those who find themselves thrust into the role of being the caregiver for their spouse or partner. Her memoir, Life Upside Down, The Fall That Transformed Our Lives, Lifting Me Through Grief, Love, and Quadruped. I knew I'd get
Quadriplegia.
I practiced that one. Oh my gosh. And
It's a tough one.
yeah, but you know it inside and out, and had probably said it many, many times. Quadriplegia there speaks to the journey of being her partner's caregiver for the past 13 years. Beth is a creative grief support practitioner, art therapist, and EMDR practitioner. She is currently training in somatic experiences, and that's Peter Levine's work, where she is gathering more tools to equip grievers to navigate the overwhelming experience of grief in the body. And Beth runs an online program called The Wheel of Grief, which gives grievers a map to navigate the wild terrain of loss. She co-leads grief rituals and ceremonies, both online and in person. And she is also a cowrie shell diviner taught to her by the late and great elder Malidoma Somé. Beth's life's mission is to normalize grief and help others know grief's medicine. I'm going to repeat that last line because I think this is why I've invited Beth on today. Basically, because it seems like we're taught something about grief, and here she is, this woman who's lived it and knows it from the inside out and is now helping people normalize it. Imagine that. Normalize grief and help others know grief's medicine. That's a big breath, but that's what I wanted to acknowledge you for, and to also say thank you for the work that you do and for being in this arena where I'm just feeling it already, where people suffer a lot and need the medicine and need guidance. And yay, you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Doreen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So when you heard me read that, what came to mind? How are you responding right away here?
To the entire bio or just that last line?
Yeah, well, all of it. Just anything that pops out that you.
I mean, it's good to hear back, have that read back to me. I've done lots of things, dabbled in different ways and bringing different modalities together. And I think my work is also constantly evolving and changing. So, so yeah, no, and I feel proud. I feel proud
Yeah.
of, yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I had a, well, that's why I guess I referenced that last line because I wanted to appreciate you for the fact that you are on some front lines that many people don't want to go to. So thank
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
usually in the podcast, I do kind of a chronology, like starting where they were born, and usually
Hmm.
it's early life where people don't have a sense that they've got a voice or that it's respected or welcomed or applauded. Yay, you kind of thing early
Right.
on. And then they have this life journey, and somewhere along the line, they wake up and say, oh, I need to find my voice. And then we
Uh-huh.
talk about the journey and then what they do now. But I feel like today's a little bit different. And that's what I've been
Okay.
telling listeners because it seems like, yeah, if you want to give us a little grounding of some background, but I think what's most important is what's going on now, currently in your life in this last year since I've known you.
Hmm.
Major kind of coming to terms with what is for you in order to do this newer work about caregiving with caretakers who are taking care of spouses and partners.
Yeah, caring for the caregiver.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. So this year, 2026, will be our 13th year of ha I always call it like both of us. I don't have quadriplegia, but we both deal with quadriplegia. So it'll be 13 years because it happened in 2012. And for the longest time, I didn't even consider working with caregivers because I was too in it. And in fact, uh, I remember asking when Michael was in the hospital at a rehab hospital. I asked somebody who was working with us, like, is there a caregiver support group? And she knew I was a therapist, and she said, no, why don't you start one? And the look on my face must have been like if I would have said something out loud, and I don't know if it's okay to cuss on the show, but I cuss a lot, especially during the accident time. I cussed a lot, but I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Like, I need support. How can you even ask me to provide support right now?
Uh-huh.
So it has taken me 12 years for me to start to get like start to realize like, oh, it's time. And I think it happened in a number of different ways, but I started working with a few caregivers, and the resonance and the feedback I was able to give and what they were able to receive, and the connection was just palpable. And really, I that's where I was like, oh, I love working with these people. So I was like, okay, I think it's time. It's time.
So before the quadriplegia,
It's better to say in Spanish, quadriplegia. I think it's
quadriplegia, yeah,
yeah.
ha-ha. We got the two ha-has at the end. So
Yeah.
before that, you were a therapist, but you weren't doing grief work?
I was doing grief work, but I was like, I'll work with any grief work. And since
Uh,
our culture associates grief with death loss, I was mainly holding space for people who have death loss.
uh-huh.
Uh, and I had to do a lot of education when I would speak to people at networking events and just all across the board. Like I work with grief, and I would often teach about how grief is more than death loss. And but people just assumed that that's all I work with because that's in our culture, it's so limited to grief equals death loss. Somebody
Yes,
died.
yes, yeah. And then I guess that before we go further and talk about what's happening currently or in this last
Mhm.
phase of your life, how did you gravitate towards grief of transition and other kinds besides loss? How did you find yourself doing that? Do you have a sense of what the root of that was for you? Because we didn't go back and hear about early life, so I'm starting
Right.
to get curious. Well, how
How
did
did
she
I get
find
here?
her? Yeah, how did she find herself on in that doing that kind of work?
Well, I specifically went into grief work after my partner's accident.
Uh-huh.
Um, Although I was also prior to that, like I did an internship in my graduate school for a hospice.
Mm.
So, and I wrote a thesis on using art therapy, using the mandala with grief. And so I did a children's grief group, which was a lot of fun. And I worked with one woman who I forget the term, but she basically, well, she was in a motorcycle accident and lost below her ribs and everything below it, and her legs and her pelvis and all that. So anyway, I was working with her also
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
during that time.
Well, when I did my PhD, it was on weight loss maintenance and management, which is an issue that I've always had and guess
Hmm.
what, still have.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
However, there was a reason why I leaned into that and found myself working at a hospital and working
Hmm.
with weight loss maintenance groups in a hospital. And then I use them as subjects for my research. So I can get the connection between myself and, what happened in my life, my own struggle. But was there anything prior to your husband's accident, and you're talking about being in school and doing this dissertation or this thesis? What
Yeah,
about
thesis.
before in grief and loss of any kind or transitions in your life when you kind of trace back from childhood to teenager to early adulthood?
Oh, that's interesting. I think I've done a grief timeline.
Yeah.
I think even just coming into the world is griefy because
Oh, that's wonderful. I love hearing that. Say that one more time.
coming into the
Yeah.
world is griefy because we
Yes.
come from our mother's womb where we have all our needs met. And then
Yeah.
it starts to get tighter and tighter, and like, okay, wait, something's happening here. And then the process of birth is also can be very challenging and can be full of grief. Well, it's, I think for the child and for the mother
Yeah.
can be there can be grief there. So
Yeah.
I think we start with grief.
Uh-huh. And we don't even the way you say it is an aha for me, actually, even
Hmm.
though it's so true and so obvious. So I hope the listeners are going mouth drop also because it's so clear, it's so obvious. Yes,
Right,
for
right.
both. Our arrival is full of joy, but we're also left something really safe and secure behind.
Yeah, and I don't think we talk about the grief of
No,
childbirth, both
no,
for the baby and for the mama. Like,
right.
I have lots of friends who had children. I don't have children, so I don't know that process, but I have girlfriends who say, yeah, it was not the birth I wanted. That was
Uh-huh.
not how I planned that, and there's grief around that process. And
Yeah.
then the whole issue of like their identity changes. So, so there's that. But in looking back in my own life, I think there's been lots of transitions. Uh,
Name just a few that seem to pop when we talk about grief.
I really struggled when I was in junior high. I would say that year was the worst year of my life, along with 2012 when my partner had his mountain biking accident. In seventh grade, so the way our school worked, our grade school went to grade six, and then junior high was seventh through ninth grade.
Uh-huh. So,
So my middle school experience, so I was in middle school and my best friend was in sixth grade. So I knew no one. I
mhm,
felt like, and I was a shy child. Um, like one of my teachers was told my parents, like, I'm worried about Beth. She's just gonna, like, when she goes to high school, she's just gonna fade into the woodwork. Like,
mhm.
because I hardly spoke. So, I didn't have a voice in junior high. So that was a hard transition. And I think middle school is a hard transition for
Yeah.
most of us.
Uh-huh.
I don't know any person who said, "Oh yeah, middle school was great," right?
Right. Right.
Because of all the changes that are going on in our bodies and our hormones and just life. So that was a struggle. And then I would say, like, probably in college, I had some struggles too, transitioning from college into what was next. I felt like I got very little support for that. Also, I was an art major,
Mhm.
and at the end of my time there, I met somebody who was very smart. He actually got a dual degree in business and art. I was like, well, why didn't I do that? Because, like, you have to know how to market yourself and make money, not just make art.
Uh-huh.
So, eventually I found art therapy, and that was from creating, like, I traveled to Europe and I was staying at the Findhorn Foundation.
Oh, yes, I remember that. And I don't hear much about it nowadays, but I
Yeah.
remember it was a place where things were magical and the
Yep.
vegetables would grow real,
Yep.
really big. And there was just a lot of good, I don't know, growing energy there, I guess you might say.
Yeah. So I was there for quite a while. I think I was there for about 10 months. I'm
Uh-huh.
forgetting now. And then I went to go travel by myself, and I'm like 24. And I woke up one day, I was in Edinburgh, and I was supposed to go out and see the sights, right? And I woke up with so much grief and sadness, and I was like, what is this?
Yeah.
And I grabbed my watercolors and I made myself paint.
Uh-huh.
And I wish I had the image. Usually I have it somewhere around, but I'm in a state of transition right now, which we could also talk about. But anyway, um, it was like this blue eyeball in breaking this heart. So the heart is breaking, and this like eye is in the middle. And
Uh-huh.
after I painted that, I realized, oh, I'm just missing the people that I just were connected to on a daily basis. And now I'm by myself and I'm just grieving. And so as soon as I like noticed that and that was mirrored to me, it that feeling of sadness was gone. And I was like, "Ah, can I help others use art to heal?" And then I met an art therapist on my travels. And so that seed got planted then, because that's my initial studies in graduate school is art therapy.
Uh-huh. Yeah, the synchronicities and the little steps along the way. Before I take a break, I want to go back to I am real curious about where you were born, what sibling you are, what your parents
Uh-huh.
were like with you early
Yeah.
on.
I'm the middle child, and I have two brothers on either end. And what else did you want to know? Like
Just
birth order?
what anything that comes from that pops given our conversation now, uh, other than
Uh,
being born, which we know now.
my dad is a Lutheran minister, so I grew up with him, and his dad was, and his uncle was. I'm my uncle, so his brother.
Uh,
So I come from a lineage of men who speak, their sermons and their public and,
uh,
doing that. So that's kind of interesting. And then my mom is a nurse. Yeah.
uh-huh. Well, then I can see good. That makes sense then about perhaps how the nurture and nature, like maybe the
Mhm.
nature, your nature is more of a introvert, quiet, but that doesn't mean that you're quiet. Introverts don't necessarily go hide. They still have a sense of where they feel safe. And your
Yeah.
mom being, I would say, a healer, even though you're calling her a nurse, I think
Hmm.
nursing is healing. So.
Hmm.
Good. I wanted to just get a little bit more of what that might have been like to have this father who's, I mean, being an introvert, I mean, you couldn't probably match up to his way of taking up space and speaking.
I don't know. I probably could. I will share a story too because I learned this when I was in college. I was doing a project creating a childhood shrine for one of my classes, which was great. So I had to call them and ask what I was like as a little toddler because I didn't remember. And they were like, "Oh, Beth, you were the leader of the neighborhood.
Oh,
You
no.
were bossy and you told people what to do." And so I was like, "What?"
Uh-huh.
Because don't know that part of me. But that's how I first started my life, was being really in charge and speaking more, telling people what to do. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also, it does relate to the kind of work that you do now, seeing what needs to be done or helping people guide them toward, I don't know what being
hmm
a leader as a little girl naturally is, but it seems like it would show up in the work that you do now.
hmm
I want to hear, definitely want to hear more about the two, what you've referenced already, the what happened in 2012, and then what you're doing nowadays for sure. And then you said there's this move, and you kind of said, didn't you say,
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
so
then I'm in transition.
transitioning.
Yeah, I don't know
Uh,
if I need to go into that, but we're dealing
well,
with mold in our house.
well,
So all my things are not around me like they normally are.
oh, I see. But still, the way that you've put grief out for me today, it and then what we're talking about is normalizing it. And it
hmm
feels like, oh, where are my things? There's even
hmm
something there. And it
Yeah,
doesn't have to be major, major grief. So like
yeah,
on like there's a sliding scale and it's all grief. So
yeah.
we'll be right back.
Okay.
If you want to get started right away to find your voice, download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com.
Hi, we're back with Beth Erlander, grief support specialist, I would say, someone that I'm learning from today. And I'm very, very excited to have already uncovered some little nuggets, and they're so rich already that I feel like I have a pile full of information that I haven't really thought of before, like grief when we're born, that there's an experience there. We're leaving something and we're transitioning. So this idea that it so what Beth is helping me see already today is that transition, no matter what, feels like there could be elements of grief in it. And that's what we're talking about today. And we're back now. Hi, Beth.
Hi.
So let's move on into
hmm
we understand how some of the ways in which you found yourself doing therapy around grief and then your partner's accident and you
hmm
wanted support and it wasn't available and somebody said
It
what.
was it was not available, and that was actually a really challenging time for many reasons. I mean, number one is that he was in a, you know, went from being an able-bodied person to being a high-level quadriplegic in an instant. So there's that, and then learning all of that, um, how to deal with that. And then there was also, I was feeling so much grief, and I was trying to read about grief, looking online for grief support. I found people who speak of grief as death loss. Um, and I often was very annoyed because I was in a grieving process, but the materials I was finding was not reflected. It was not mirrored back to me. So I felt like I didn't fit in even in the grief community.
uh,
Because it's mostly death loss at that time and what I was finding instead of life transition and naming that there are life transitions that are also full of grief. We
mhm,
don't have to just lose someone to death to experience grief and loss. So,
mhm. And then moving forward, you said that you weren't able to actually focus on caregivers. And now we're talking about more currently this last year that I've known you, learning more about what it means to give, I guess, care, like you say, to caregivers
mhm,
and what that To me, that feels like I've been watching you find your voice currently.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to speak to caregiver grief because that's what I was experiencing. I had to become my partner's caregiver at the young age of 42, and nobody was holding the grief that I was experiencing of losing what we had. And I think that's part of the challenge is because we're so focused on what's happening now. And I think one of the big things about tending to caregivers is that when they're tending to their partner or their spouse, like most of the attention is on that because they're the one that has the disease or the accident or this, it's like, and I experienced that quite often of people not really talking to me of like, well, how are you, Beth? A few people did that, but it was like, how's Michael? If
Uh,
I'm out in public and Michael's not around, like, well, how's Michael doing? Especially in the beginning. Um, and so the grief gets left behind. And as I'm saying that, I can feel my own unprocessed grief arising, actually,
yeah,
just to remember that time.
this is you finding your voice, I think. Exactly.
Hmm.
What it takes is to feel into where it's hard to talk about it
Hmm. Hmm.
because you feel it, you remember it. Or this is what
Right.
I just
Right.
noticed with you. Yeah.
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 Yep. Yeah.
Then what can you say about caring for the caregiver? Just see what comes naturally, to see what comes about it, what it means, or
Well, I think it can be a very lonely place. So to provide support to someone who's going through a similar experience as I did, like I think that's why the sessions I've had so far with some of the caregivers I've already worked with, that's why it feels so good, is they ask me questions sometimes that are like, well, can I ask you this question? And I'm like, I'm an open book, and if you've read my book, Um, I talk about many things in there that there's a chapter on sex. Um, so I'm pretty open with my process with people, and that's also something that became very important to me because that actually became one of my biggest losses was my sex life, able-bodied sex life. And I felt like it was really important to put that in the book.
uh-huh,
So I tell people, like, you can talk to me about anything. And I feel like it's so helpful for them to be able to ask those questions that are hard to ask.
uh-huh. The other thing I guess I felt right then when you tapped into the emotion and the memory, and
Hmm.
that's the physical, the embodied memory, is
Hmm.
that if somebody is working with you and they start to feel something, you can feel it also.
Hmm.
And they know somebody really knows how they feel deeply, even though they haven't yet expressed it or tapped into it in a way that needs to be
Hmm.
spoken up about, perhaps
Yeah.
articulated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the word you used when we first started today, resonance,
Hmm.
right? That
Hmm. Yeah.
you feel the resonance because you're
Yeah.
feeling what the person's feeling. And
Yeah.
that's partly your gift, is to be able to feel it and to know it, acknowledge it like you did with me, and accept it.
Hmm.
So let's talk about medicine.
Grief as medicine.
Yeah.
Grief as medicine is the only way to get through it. And well, we get through a process. I mean, grief is an initiation process. And if we put it out of ourselves or try to keep it away, it's actually going to do more harm. So it's about inviting it in and realizing, like, okay, I see it as like a human, like I often speak of grief as being a disheveled human that shows up at the front porch and it's knocking at the door and it's like hanging out and it's kind of being a nuisance, but it's like wants to get your attention and all it wants is to come in and to be known. And so I, say you got to invite it in for tea and cookies and start to learn who it is.
Uh-huh. In my work with people and speaking anxiety, I know exactly what you mean about the learning to go towards it with compassion. How
Hmm.
do you help people come to that, like you say, invited in with tea and cookies when there's so much resistance? How do you?
That's hard. That's hard.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes these people don't want to. I mean, I think that's why they come to see me is finally they realize like, okay, I need some support with this
Yeah,
because I don't want grief to be a part of my life.
yeah, yeah. But there's a new way to be with it
Hmm.
that is more gives you more access to more of you because I think
Hmm.
that at least that's my understanding of the work that I do
Hmm.
with unprocessed fear, I guess you might say. I hadn't thought of my work as unprocessed fear, but
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of the work is teaching them to be okay with whatever emotion shows up, right? Teaching about emotions as they just come and they go and they're not here forever. Grief comes in waves. I teach them how to be with the grief. I call them grief bursts when they show up,
ah,
you
yeah,
know, and what to do with their bodies if they can't deal with the grief burst in the moment, like if they're out in public or in a meeting or, because these grief bursts come out of nowhere.
mm,
Um, so yeah, and then teach them about their nervous systems as well and like understanding how they feel in their body when it shows up and how to support it, as simple as like, let's put a hand there.
yeah,
No. Do you notice a difference when you just place a hand on your heart and just breathe?
yeah. Ooh, that's nice to be with you right now. When I saw you put
Yeah.
your hand on, it made me
Yeah.
do that too. And I think that when you're really listening to somebody and if they're really listening to you by you just doing that one gesture, I think it like it just it helped me put my hand on my
Hmm.
heart and to
Hmm.
take a breath and to
Hmm.
be with. I think that's what we're also talking
Hmm.
about with grief is the be with and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, I talk about befriending grief.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as we move to coming to a close now, is there something that you want to say about the work that you do or the work that you're, I don't know, designing?
I'm in a in-between phase. I just finished a group program that was general grief. And now with this new insight coming in about focusing on caregivers, I need to kind of recreate it, just for caregivers. So I'm about to do that. I've given myself April off to not do or push or create. It's sort of in an incubator stage, things are starting to come in. So I'm allowing that creative process to come forward in a more organic way. And I'm excited to my social media posts are going to be changing in May. In the next few months, you'll see more caregiver posts and speaking about caregiver grief. And then I'm hoping to have an online program for caregivers and their caregiver grief. And it'll either be 3 or 4 months, probably starting in the fall. I probably will do what I did last year because I really love supporting people in the fall, starting because fall is the time of grief, especially here in the Northern Hemisphere, because
Mhm.
nature is dying, things,
Yeah.
leaves are falling, so it's like, let's gather in the time of grief. And I love supporting them through the winter and into the coming of spring.
Mhm.
And it's especially important, I think, to have more support during the holidays, because that's a really hard time for people who are grieving. Um, so So yeah, that's what I'm creating.
Good. And especially in the fall that you talked about, by the time the holidays come, the group would have already been being cohesive and supportive, and they trust and know each other by then. So
Yeah.
if since this is about voice, I was wondering, do you think in the way that you talked about and you put your arm out in inviting and being friendly with grief, does grief have a voice?
Absolutely. I think grief has a voice. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we need to give expression to that voice. So in my groups, I often have people write prompts um, to a certain theme, and then it's great if we can read those out to each other, or if people don't want to write, they can also draw. Um, and I am excited to bring in more art and creativity into my programs as well. So I'm kind of returning to my art therapy roots, and I'm like, oh, I've missed the art therapy component. So I'm I'm going to be bringing more of that in as well.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah. Well, in terms of grief having a voice, I think there's also the listener. So you as somebody who's developing programs where grief can have a voice because you
mhm,
can listen to it, you can receive it, you don't have a judgment, you're not trying to push people through
mhm,
something, you're helping them discover that voice of grief much more,
mhm,
I think,
mhm, mhm.
is what I'm taking today.
Yeah, yeah.
So in this last this idea that you are moving from being kind of a general helping people go through transitions and seeing that as some form of grief, um, and you're becoming clear around focusing just on caregivers. Is there any kind of, I mean, that's a different identity, a different
hmm
work. Is grief showing up there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I've hesitated. Also, just not feeling like I was ready or feeling like I had to not be a caregiver to be doing supporting caregivers, if that makes any sense. Like I need to be away from it, but I'm in it still. So, so yeah, and I know I'm not going to be only working with caregivers because they still do grief work, but it'll be interesting, I have some like, oh, am I going to be working with only caregivers?
Mhm.
And my life as I know it right now and the clients who are showing up right now, I'm not going to work with those clients. I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, there's definitely some grief there for sure.
Uh-huh. And one of the things I read in what you wrote to me beforehand was that you are comfortable in the not knowing.
hmm
And that's what this, and I'm really glad to see you and be with you during this life moment of
hmm
a transition that's happening and yet hasn't really grounded.
Mm-mm. No, I'm in transition right now.
Yes. So that's why I was excited about interviewing you because you're in transition, you're finding your voice,
Yeah.
and your voice is still, but there's a voice that's leading you to it. And it's the voice of having felt like, oh, it's really true. I have had this experience and I know it from the
hmm
inside out. Therefore, I know I can help,
hmm
is
Yeah.
what, and
Yeah, absolutely.
well, a little bit of space now, a breath, and notice if something comes through, what might want to come through, since we're talking about easy knowing and the not knowing. See last words that want to show up for you here.
Yeah, my book is coming into my consciousness. I want to just shout out for that. And you mentioned it in the beginning. And it makes sense to focus on caregivers because my book is about my process of becoming a caregiver and the transition I went through during, since my partner's accident. And so it makes it makes more sense because it speaks to, like, I'm my ideal client, right? So it speaks to the caregivers who are suddenly thrust into that. I have to care for my partner who has been able-bodied through in our entire relationship, and now it's all on me. And so there's a lot that's really beautiful in the book, and I think very supportive, and it'll be a great companion guide, for them in the program. So I'm
Uh,
excited. It's just all coming together and making so much sense. So
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I see the excitement, and I'm glad to give you a platform to share it and to share what's coming up too. Thank you so
yeah.
much.
Thanks, Doreen. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Thank you for being with us today for this episode of Find Your Voice, Change Your Life. Each person Doreen interviews shares what has helped them find their voice. You can learn from these guests and find your voice so you can be confident to speak up and speak out. And remember to download Doreen's free 7-step guide to fearless speaking at doreen7steps.com. We hope you enjoyed the show and will return next time. Until then, goodbye for now.